was literally on one of the biggest billboards in Times Square. And so by all, metrics, I had arrived. This is what every person in fashion essentially dreams of experiencing. And I started to notice something. It didn't really make me feel that different inside. I moved to several places, but ended up in New York City, and I was in the fashion industry. Was trying to make my way as a model, right? And because I'd done a couple of fashion shows in college, small fashion shows like Homecoming and stuff like that, and I thought that'd be a great way to see the world. And so anyway, I'm in New York City. I'm waiting tables because I didn't have a very easy transition into that world. So I had to support myself by working in restaurants. And one day I'm waiting tables in Times Square, which is the theater district of New York. And I see this bus going down the street, and I saw something familiar, and I went closer to the window, and a couple minutes later another bus went down the street, and I saw I was on the side of the bus in a Gap advertisement. And it was so shocking because, long story short, I'd done some photos for the Gap about 3 months prior, but it really didn't pay a lot of money. And jobs that didn't pay a lot of money had a high chance of not coming out. But for some reason, the stars aligned, and the Gap, the retailer, chose me to be the face of their fall, I forget what year it was, campaign. And my face was literally, within a day or two, my face was everywhere. It was all over New York. It was all over the country. It was all over the world. But what was interesting is, because I didn't make a lot of money on that job, I still had to work at the restaurant. And so I had a dilemma on my hands. Do I keep working at the restaurant even though I'm all over New York City? Or do I quit and just take the leap of faith and hope that it's all going to work out? And I remember leaving my shift that day and walking around the corner, and I looked up and I saw this billboard in Times Square with me on it. I was literally on one of the biggest billboards in Times Square. And so by all, metrics, I had arrived. This is what every person in fashion essentially dreams of experiencing. And I started to notice something. It didn't really make me feel that different inside. Yes, I was excited to finally have a billboard and to finally be recognized for the work that I was doing, but it was very superficial. It was all external, and the sense of fulfillment that I thought was going to come from that didn't end up coming. And so I thought, well, maybe it just means I need another job like this, but it pays better. And I ended up getting that job, and the sense of fulfillment still didn't come. And this was an interesting moment for me because it made me start questioning everything, really. The whole script that we were sold as kids: the more successful you are, the happier you're going to be. And you just need to get all your ducks in order. And I started to dabble in yoga and meditation experiences at that time. And they talked about this thing called inner happiness, which I had never really considered before. I didn't hear that in church. Nobody talked about inner peace or inner happiness. And so I started engaging in these practices, and I started reading these quote spiritual books, and I started learning about this inner world. And that became really exciting for me. This is in the 90s. So there was no wellness scene. Nobody was talking about this stuff at the time. And then I started to just celebrate the little things. I started to understand that the goodness we were looking for and the fulfillment was really in the small moments. Just like you said, just literally stopping and smelling the flowers and looking at the clouds and just indulging in the in-between moments of life. Now, what was different was I wasn't going around New York City saying, okay, let me stop and smell this flower. I noticed that just from doing my inner work, I just started slowing down, and I was okay not being on, like as we started the conversation talking about. And yeah. And then I realized I started looking more forward to my inner practices than I was looking forward to going to modeling castings. And that was my cue, my internal cue to move from New York to Los Angeles to go all in. And that's where I became full-time yoga meditation teacher. And that was, yeah, almost 30 years ago. I'm
It's
52, by
interesting.
the way. I'm a little older than you.
Yeah, you look great. Not much older, but we would not have been in the same high school, but I would have been
No.
right behind you.
Right, right,
I
right.
might have known your name if we were in the same, area. That's how that works. I think what's interesting is a couple things. Number 1, just a side comment, I have a buddy of mine who's a photographer who was in New York, and, he was telling me about how in the '90s, how you could make so much more than today because you were on the sides of buses, you were on billboards, you were, there were all these different ways that the photographer even was cashing in on that, which I think is really interesting. Just it has nothing to do with the deeper point here, but it was just something as you were talking about. The deeper point is I think we're all wired for that results oriented success. And
Yeah.
what you find is it's fairly empty. And I started my career in my 20s in wealth management, and I was managing people's money, and I never had any money. So it was always interesting to me. I had this great gratitude and curiosity to learn and to listen and to help. But in 25 years of listening to those conversations, there's almost like a bell curve of success that I recognize. And the bell curve is when someone starts to make it, they chase stuff and they build a repertoire of garbage in their life, boats, houses, whatever. I've done the same thing. So it's like that new money track, and then when they get up towards the top, and not everybody actually goes through the transformation. Most people stay seeking stuff and unhappy, but the ones that make that transformation to next chapter, next generation, family oriented mentality, just thinking bigger and growing, they tend to start shedding the stuff. Life slows down. They're looking for something of impact. Um, and Many years ago, the last point I'll make is many years ago, I started a practice called the habit of daily impact. And it started with having a bad day. And I noticed I don't have a lot of bad days, but when I do, there was a way to turn it around quickly. And the way that I turned it around quickly was I started doing nice things for other people.
Hmm.
And very simple. Maybe I held the door. Maybe it was those small moments you talked about, slowing down, opening the door for someone, smiling, being at the grocery store and complimenting the girl on her nails, or thank you for working on a day that you talked about Thanksgiving. I always thank people for working on those days if I need something, because it's a rough day to work. And just acknowledging that existence in other people and slowing down allowed me to get out of my own way. And so I think when you start looking at that practice, how fulfilling is it to be in that present state versus chasing the results that so many of us, including myself, were doing for so long. And last point, it's kind of cool that Gap came back. So like now when you say Gap, like Gap's popular again, like it got cool, it was uncool, and now it's cool again. So that's actually a cool win to tie it all together.
Yeah, I consider, you know, a lot of people, especially men, would consider the fact that they work hard to provide for others as, that's what I do and that makes me feel good. And I think there's some truth to that. And I would also argue that you also need something for you. You want to engage in something that lights you up inside, outside of, taking care of other people. It's admirable, it's virtuous to take care of other people, but you also need to take care of yourself. And so when you talk about impact activities, things like compliments, sincere compliments, random acts of kindness, being of service, I consider those kinds of activities to be our true health insurance, actually. And I'm not just talking about physical health insurance. It's not going to sew your arm back on if you if you have a problem with that, with your arm, but it there's a protective mechanism that I've noticed in my life, that if you optimize your life for service, if you leave a service centric life or a kindness centric life, you don't get as sick as often. And if you do get sick, you heal a lot faster. You find yourself more so in the right place at the right time. And if you do happen to be in a, tricky situation, you have a stronger connection to your intuition, which is always guiding you. Our intuition is like our inner GPS. And just like if we were driving in an unknown area, we would lean very heavily on GPS. A lot of times we just ignore our intuition because it doesn't make logical sense to us, but it's telling us to go to the left, and we see something shiny on the right and we think, oh, I want to go to the right. And that mentality is really a function of us thinking that our happiness is going to be on the other side of that shiny object. And it could be a goal, it could be a belief system, an ideology, an attractive person. But if our intuition is telling us go to the left, eventually we want to get in the habit of seriously considering whatever it's telling us to do, with the understanding that it always has our best interest at heart. It's always had our best interest. It's always had our best interest at heart, more so than any other person or any other thing that we've ever experienced. And we ultimately want to be loyal to that internal guidance as much as we can, because if we are, we'll see that that's how we end up in those situations that are better than we ever anticipated for ourselves, because it's always leading us in the direction of more purpose centric activities. And what does that look like? You doing something that you probably would have done for free. Maybe you get paid for it, but you do it because it makes you feel like more of yourself, and not you're not doing it just for the money. Like Quincy Jones has this really beautiful quote. He says, "I never create music for money, not even Thriller." He goes, "The moment you start thinking about money in the creative process, God walks out of the room." And I really do believe that.
So YouTube has this cool feature where they pick the next video for you, and it's right here on this screen. So I hope you enjoy this next video.